the metamorphosis that might be happening right now. Some stories don't begin when we open a book. They begin when something inside us quietly fractures. The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka is one of those works. Not because it tells the story of a man waking up transformed into an insect, but because it reveals something far more unsettling. Most of us wake up every day living a life we no longer recognize as our own. And yet, we keep going as if that were normal. Perhaps the real shock isn't Gregor Samsa's transformation, but the fact that no one truly reacts to it. Not him. Not his family. Not society. That alone says a lot. We live in a time when internal collapse has become routine, chronic exhaustion is seen as a sign of productivity, and losing one's own identity is called maturity. This is the initial provocation of this philosophical analysis of the metamorphosis. What if the insect isn't the anomaly, but the most honest metaphor for the modern human condition? The first time I read Kafka, I didn't feel fear. I felt recognition. An uncomfortable, almost embarrassing recognition. Existential literature doesn't scream. It whispers truths we try to avoid hearing. And that is exactly what makes this work so relevant, so necessary, so therapeutic. Kafka not as a dark author but as a mirror. A mirror reflecting modern alienation, human dehumanization, and the identity crises many experience without ever naming them. Throughout this philosophical YouTube video, I don't want to just analyze symbols or explain concepts. I want to walk with you through an experience of consciousness. I want each chapter to function as a pause, almost like a philosophical audiobook narrated for the soul. Here we'll talk about burnout in literature, existential psychology, loneliness and isolation, but always with a compassionate, human, attainable perspective. No judgment. No unnecessary weight. If you've ever felt worthless when you weren't productive, if you've noticed some relationships only exist while you're useful, if you've ever felt like you were living on autopilot, then this isn't just content about literature. It's an invitation. An invitation to inner growth and to philosophy as a living practice. Because maybe the greatest question the metamorphosis leaves us with isn't, what happened to Gregor? But, what is happening to me right now? The awakening no one wants to have. When I read the Metamorphosis, I always come back mentally to that initial moment. The awakening. Gregor Samsa opens his eyes and realizes that something is deeply wrong. Not just with his body but with his very existence. In any honest philosophical analysis of the Metamorphosis, this moment isn't about a man who turned into an insect. It's about that silent day when we wake up and realize the life we're living wasn't exactly a conscious choice. And this realization usually comes without warning, without gentleness. The discomfort comes from the rupture of an invisible pact we make with routine. A pact not to question too much, to keep going. That's why this work holds such a central place in existential literature and philosophy. Kafka doesn't construct a path to revelation, he throws us straight into it. Just like life does. How many people do you know, or maybe yourself, who have said, I woke up and didn't recognize myself? No explicit tragedy, no external collapse. Just clarity. And clarity hurts at first. In Kafka Explained, this opening reveals something essential. The identity crisis doesn't begin at the moment of metamorphosis, it only becomes visible then. Gregor doesn't question who he is. He worries about being late for work. That's brutal. And profoundly contemporary. Here, the meaning of the metamorphosis touches directly on modern alienation. Even transformed, he still measures himself by productivity. He still blames himself for failing to fulfill a function. It's impossible not to link this to the silent burnout so many experience today, a point where burnout and literature intersect almost prophetically. From the perspective of existential psychology, this awakening isn't a beginning, it's a delayed collapse. An identity built solely on duty, performance, and utility begins to crumble. Kafka shows us, with cruel subtlety, that human dehumanization doesn't start when someone is socially rejected. It starts when personal value is reduced to the role one performs. Gregor was already invisible before becoming an insect. His body only made it impossible to ignore what had long been deformed inside. Whenever I reflect on this, I notice something important. The real terror isn't waking up different. It's waking up conscious. Consciousness demands a high price. When you realize you've spent years meeting others' expectations, playing roles you never truly chose, your soul goes into shock. Curiously, this is the first step in any serious process of deep personal growth. Before change comes discomfort. No one changes from comfort. If I translate this into practical, everyday life, I would say something simple. Observe your mornings. Before picking up your phone, before diving into obligations, ask yourself quietly, am I truly living or just functioning? This seemingly simple question carries the same spirit of literature and consciousness that runs through Kafka's The Metamorphosis. For those who feel this discomfort and want to go deeper, readings like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning help give language to what was once only a diffuse anguish. Gregor tries to convince himself that everything will be fine. He denies, adapts, waits. This initial denial is profoundly human. How many times do we do the same? We change jobs thinking the problem was the position. We change routines thinking it's just fatigue. But deep down, the crisis is something more profound: identity. And identity isn't solved with superficial adjustments. Existential philosophy teaches that fleeing consciousness comes at a high cost. Kafka seems to whisper this from the first pages, as if saying, you may keep functioning, but something inside you has already awakened. And after that, there's no full return to the previous state. This is the point of no return in inner metamorphosis. What unsettles me most about this beginning is that no one enters Gregor's room to ask who he is now. Everyone wants to know when he'll be useful again. This is the essence of modern alienation. And perhaps that's exactly why this work remains so relevant, so necessary for a philosophical YouTube video on inner growth. It doesn't accuse, it reveals. This first awakening doesn't conclude anything. It opens a process. A painful, silent, deeply human process. Gregor doesn't yet realize it, but his previous life was already a sophisticated prison. And when consciousness begins to see that the next confrontation is inevitable, the weight of work, duty, and guilt, this is where metamorphosis deepens, and it's exactly where we move next. The slave before the insect. Even before the physical metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa was already imprisoned. And this becomes clear when we look at his previous routine. He didn't explicitly hate his job, but he didn't choose it either. He just fulfilled it. This is one of the quietest and most powerful critiques the Metamorphosis offers. Gregor isn't a man forced into exploitation. He's someone who internalized obligation to the point of mistaking it for identity. Here, modern alienation isn't external, it lives within. Whenever I analyze this point in a philosophical reading of the Metamorphosis, I see how Kafka anticipates discussions we now call burnout. Gregor lives tired, but he doesn't allow himself to stop. Exhausted, yet guilty even at the thought of rest. This isn't just a physical problem, it's a psychological prison. Existential psychology explains it well. When personal value is tied exclusively to performance, rest becomes a moral failure. Gregor supports the household, pays debts that aren't even his, forsakes simple desires, and does all this without question. This detail is crucial for understanding the meaning of the metamorphosis. He isn't coerced through violence. He erases himself out of loyalty, fear, and a distorted sense of responsibility. How many people today live exactly like this? Working not to live but living only to work. This isn't dedication. It's self-abandonment. In existential philosophy, especially in literary existentialism, there's a central question. Are you living according to your values or just responding to expectations? Gregor never asks himself this. He lives on such a deep autopilot that his own body seems to say, enough. It's no coincidence the metamorphosis occurs after years of oppressive routine. The body often manifests what consciousness didn't have the courage to verbalize. I've seen this happen countless times in real life. People develop anxiety, depression, chronic pain, not because they are weak but because they stayed strong too long. In Kafka's The Metamorphosis, work isn't just a backdrop. It is the axis of the identity crisis. Gregor doesn't know who he is outside of the role of provider. And when that role disappears, everything collapses. There's an even subtler detail. Gregor feels guilty for not being able to work, even after becoming an insect. This unconscious guilt is one of the most disturbing aspects of human dehumanization. He doesn't ask whether he is suffering. He asks whether he is failing. This reveals how much his identity has been hijacked by duty. Existential literature rarely portrays this level of internal conditioning so precisely. If I make this practical, I would invite you to observe your own relationship with work. Not just the job itself, but the meaning you assign to it. Ask honestly, if I stopped today, who would I still be? This question is uncomfortable but necessary for any serious process of inner growth and applied philosophy. A simple yet powerful practice is to list everything you do out of obligation versus everything you do with purpose. Not to change it all at once, but to see clearly. Readings like Byung-Chul Han's The Burnout Society deepen this reflection, echoing what Kafka already pointed out decades ago. A society that turns people into functions. In Kafka Explained, this chapter of Gregor's life shows that the metamorphosis wasn't a random punishment. It was a symbolic consequence. When the soul is ignored too long, something must break. Literature and consciousness converge at this point. The body becomes the stage for the conflict the mind refused to face. The saddest part is realizing no one asks if Gregor is happy, only if he's efficient. This isn't just a family problem. It's structural, cultural, the foundation of modern alienation. When human value is measured solely by utility, dehumanization doesn't need to be explicit. It happens silently, in chronic exhaustion, in the gradual loss of zest for life. This second movement of the narrative prepares us for something even more painful. Because when someone ceases to be useful, what seemed like love begins to reveal its hidden conditions. And this is exactly the point where the story advances. Work stops being the center and family relationships take the stage, not as refuge but as a cruel mirror of the value assigned to a human being. Family and conditional love. When I observe Gregor's family in the Metamorphosis, something strikes me immediately. No one asks how he feels. Their first concern isn't his suffering, but the practical impact of his transformation. This reveals, almost surgically, a type of love that exists only while the machinery works. Here, a philosophical reading of the Metamorphosis leads to an uncomfortable reflection on relationships that exist more out of necessity than genuine presence. In existential literature, family is often portrayed as a refuge. Kafka subverts this. He shows that often home can be the first tribunal. Gregor was loved while he provided. When he loses utility, affection begins to evaporate. This detail directly touches on human dehumanization. A person's value isn't intrinsic, it's functional. This logic, painful as it is extremely common in modern alienation. Whenever I reflect on this, I think of how many people confuse love with dependency. As long as they deliver results, attention, or resources, they are accepted. When they fail, they are tolerated at most. Existential psychology calls this conditional love, a bond that requires performance to exist. Kafka doesn't accuse Gregor's family of explicit malice. He reveals something even more disturbing: the normalcy of indifference. The father reacts with aggression. The mother oscillates between denial and fear. The sister, initially caring, assumes the role out of obligation. Each represents a possible human response to what deviates from the norm. In the meaning of the Metamorphosis, the family isn't a caricatured villain. It's a portrait of a society that doesn't know how to love what it doesn't understand. And when it doesn't understand, it withdraws. There's a very specific pain here, the pain of being rejected without words. No long speeches. Closed doors, prolonged silences, avoided glances. Gregor's loneliness isn't just physical, it's emotional. This type of silent exclusion is one of existentialism's deepest themes because it leaves no visible marks, only internal voids. If we apply this to daily life, the lesson is direct, though difficult to face. How many relationships do you maintain only while you're delivering something? How often do you feel the need to prove your worth to deserve affection? These questions aren't meant to break relationships impulsively, but to see them with clarity. Literature and consciousness teach that clarity precedes any healthy transformation. A simple yet powerful practice is observing how people react when you say no. Not as a test, but as a reading of reality. Who stays, stays for who you are. Who leaves may never have been truly present. Readings like Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements help understand these invisible agreements that govern many relationships. The sister deserves special attention. At first she cares, brings food, cleans the room. This creates a silent hope. But that hope carries weight, expectation. And expectation without awareness turns into resentment. Existential philosophy warns us about this. Expecting another to save us is a subtle way of outsourcing our own value. In Kafka Explained, this chapter shows that collapse doesn't happen all at once. It settles gradually. The family adapts to Gregor's absence as a provider, and as they adapt, he becomes dispensable. This transition is perhaps one of the most cruel in the work, because it reveals that function-based affection always has an expiration date. The most painful part is that Gregor accepts this logic. He doesn't revolt. He internalizes rejection as guilt. This is a central point in existential psychology. When love is conditioned for too long, a person begins to believe they only deserve to exist while useful. This belief doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys identities. This chapter confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. Not all rejection comes from hatred. Some comes from the inability to love beyond function. And when that becomes clear, loneliness ceases to be merely external. It inhabits the room, the mind, and the silence. It's in this space that the narrative moves forward, deepening isolation not just as punishment, but as a state of consciousness. The room is a prison of consciousness. As I progressed through Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, I noticed that Gregor's room ceases to be just a physical space. It becomes a symbol, a powerful symbol of the isolated mind, of consciousness confined. In any careful philosophical reading of The Metamorphosis, this room represents where society pushes what it cannot handle. It's not just a room. It's a silent exile. Gregor's isolation doesn't happen through shouts or explicit orders. It happens through closing doors, through the gradual reduction of contact. This is one of the most common forms of human dehumanization. Distancing without confrontation. The loneliness and isolation that settle in there aren't only imposed from the outside. Slowly, Gregor begins to accept confinement as if it were natural. And that is deeply disturbing. In existential philosophy, isolation can carry two opposite meanings. It can be punishment or it can be a space for consciousness. Kafka plays with this ambiguity constantly. Gregor's room is at once a prison and a mirror. It is there that he begins to observe his own existence without distractions. No work, no function. Just being, or attempting to be. Whenever I reflect on this, I am reminded of how we avoid silence. We fill every minute with noise, tasks, screens. Silence scares us because it reveals. In the meaning of The Metamorphosis, the room forces Gregor to confront himself, even if he lacks the emotional language to do so. Existential psychology highlights precisely this point. When the external world goes quiet, consciousness begins to speak. There is something strikingly contemporary about this confinement. How many people today live isolated even while surrounded by others? How many are locked in symbolic rooms, trapped in routines that distance them from their own feelings? Modern alienation doesn't require walls. It requires internal disconnection. Kafka anticipates this with astonishing precision. If I were to translate this into practical advice, I would make a simple yet profound invitation. Reserve moments of conscious isolation. Not as escape, but as encounter. 10 minutes a day without stimuli, without your phone, without tasks. Just presence. This kind of practice, simple yet rare, helps transform isolation into introspection, not punishment. Readings like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations speak directly to this approach. In the room, Gregor begins to notice subtle changes in his desires. What once seemed important loses its meaning. What was ignored starts to take space. This process is painful but necessary in any path of inner growth and applied philosophy. Consciousness matures in silence, not in a flood of stimuli. In Kafka Explained, this confinement also exposes something socially cruel. The less someone participates in the productive world, the less the world feels obligated to see them. The room becomes invisible. And what is invisible gradually ceases to exist for others. This mechanism is central to understanding modern alienation and the structural loneliness of our time. At a certain point, the room stops being imposed and becomes internalized. Gregor no longer tries to leave. He no longer insists. This is the most dangerous moment of isolation, when it stops being circumstance and becomes identity. Existential literature warns strongly about this. It is not isolation itself that destroys, but the belief that there is no place in the world outside it. This chapter leaves us in a state of suspension. The room is closed, but consciousness is open. And when consciousness opens without anyone listening, a new kind of pain emerges, the impossibility of communication. It is at this point that the story moves forward, revealing not just physical isolation but something even deeper, the loss of language and the loss of being heard. Lost language and incommunicability. As I move further into Kafka's The Metamorphosis, something becomes even more painful than Gregor's physical isolation. He thinks like a human, feels like a human, but can no longer express himself like a human. His language is lost. And when language is lost, connection breaks. In any deep philosophical reading of The Metamorphosis, this moment shows that the greatest tragedy is not being different, but being misunderstood. Existential philosophy has always treated language as a bridge between consciousnesses. When that bridge collapses, the individual exists only within themselves. Gregor speaks, but no one understands him. And gradually, no one even tries to understand. This is a brutal portrait of modern loneliness and isolation. People who feel intensely, reflect deeply, but find no listening ear. Not for lack of words, but for lack of space. In Kafka Explained, this incommunicability is not only literal. It is symbolic. Gregor represents all those who, at some point, realize that their pain no longer fits into everyday conversations. What they feel is too complex for quick, superficial, or utilitarian dialogue. Existential literature highlights exactly this. When depth meets a shallow world, silence imposes itself. Whenever I reflect on this passage, I remember how often people say, "I try to explain, but it seems no one understands." This phrase carries enormous weight. Existential psychology shows that being unheard repeatedly generates slow internal erosion. A person begins to doubt their own experience, begins to shut up before even trying to speak. And this forced silence doesn't bring peace, it brings invisibility. Kafka shows that Gregor's family only hears noise. They don't attempt to decipher intention. They don't approach true listening. This detail reinforces human dehumanization. When we don't understand the other, we reduce their speech to sound. How often do we do this in daily life? Interrupt, minimize, advise without listening. These behaviors build invisible walls between people who could connect. If I translate this to practical life, the lesson is direct and profoundly transformative. Learn to listen before responding. Listen without preparing arguments. Listen without correcting. Listen without trying to fix. This simple practice is one of the most powerful tools for inner growth and applied philosophy. Books like Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication help develop this conscious listening that Kafka shows to be absent. There is also the other side of incommunicability, difficulty expressing what we feel. Sometimes the world isn't deaf. Sometimes we simply weren't taught to name our emotions. Gregor feels guilt, fear, sadness, but cannot organize it into language. Existential psychology calls this emotional illiteracy, and it's more common than we think. In modern alienation, speaking about feelings is still seen as weakness in many contexts. The result is a society full of people who think deeply but express superficially. In The Meaning of the Metamorphosis, Kafka exposes this fracture with brutal honesty. Language fails, and with it fails mutual recognition. From personal experience, I've seen how writing can become a way to recover lost language. Journals, letters never sent, solitary reflections, all help reorganize the internal world. This is why literature and consciousness walk together. When speech fails, writing sustains. Authors like Clarice Lispector engage deeply with this kind of eloquent silence. The most painful aspect, however, is realizing that over time Gregor stops even trying to communicate. He learns that his voice finds no echo. This is the point where incommunicability ceases to be circumstance and becomes belief. And beliefs shape destinies. Existential philosophy warns, when we believe we won't be heard, we begin to disappear slowly. This chapter confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. Being understood is a basic human need. When it is denied, something essential breaks. And as language is lost, indifference begins to occupy the space left by dialogue. It is precisely here that the story moves forward, showing that the absence of listening paves the way for an even more silent form of violence. The subtle violence of indifference. At this point in Kafka's The Metamorphosis, I notice that the most devastating violence in the story is not explicit. It does not shout, it does not announce itself. It seeps in. It is the violence of indifference. Gregor is no longer fought as a threat. He is ignored as irrelevant. And this shift in posture says much about human dehumanization in modern alienation. At first there is shock, then fear, then fatigue, finally indifference. That is the cycle. The family stops reacting because reacting requires emotional energy. Ignoring is easier. In any philosophical reading of the Metamorphosis, this point marks the transition from conflict to abandonment. And abandonment, as existential psychology shows, wounds more deeply than direct aggression. Kafka describes small violences: food thrown carelessly, the room left dirty, the absence of care. Individually, none of this seems cruel. But together, it reveals something devastating. Gregor is no longer perceived as worthy of attention. This is the advanced stage of modern alienation, when the other no longer provokes either anger or compassion. Whenever I reflect on this, I think about how many people suffer not from explicit attacks, but from the absence of presence. Messages left unanswered. Glances returned with nothing. Promises postponed indefinitely. The subtle violence of indifference is socially accepted because it leaves no visible marks. But internally, it erodes identity. In Kafka Explained, this passage reveals that human dehumanization doesn't happen abruptly. It is progressive. It begins with small concessions to negligence. One day without care. Another without listening. Until abandonment becomes normal. Existential literature has rarely been so precise in showing this silent process. If I translate this to practical life, the lesson is clear. Observe where you are being indifferent, to others and yourself. How often do you ignore signs of fatigue, sadness, or inner misalignment? Indifference often begins within. Simple conscious self-care practices, Real breaks, clear boundaries, attention to the body, help interrupt this cycle. Readings like Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score deepen this understanding. There is also the violence of acclimation. Gregor adapts to neglect. He begins to expect less. Existential psychology points out that this is one of the most dangerous mechanisms. When a person adjusts expectations to avoid suffering, they also shrink their space for dignity. Pain diminishes, but so does life. In modern alienation, indifference is often mistaken for neutrality. But it is never neutral. It always favors erasure. In The Meaning of the Metamorphosis, Kafka shows that abandonment doesn't need malice. The mere absence of emotional responsibility suffices. From personal experience, I've seen how conscious presence can transform entire environments. A simple gesture of attention, real listening, basic care often restores humanity to those on the brink of symbolic disappearance. Literature and consciousness remind us that acknowledging the other is a profoundly political and spiritual act. The most painful point in this chapter is realizing that Gregor ceases to be a problem. He becomes a silent inconvenience, something to avoid. When someone stops being a problem, they also stop being a priority. And this shift seals the process of exclusion. This moment in the narrative prepares us for one last hope. Because even amid widespread indifference, there remains a connection that seems to resist. A figure who, for a time, represents care and possibility. It is from this fragile hope that the story advances, and it is precisely here that the pain deepens further. The sister, hope, and betrayal. In Kafka's The Metamorphosis, Gregor's sister emerges as the last spark of humanity. When I return to this section, I notice how carefully Kafka constructs this hope. It doesn't appear grandiose. It appears practical. Food brought, room cleaned, a little attention. In any philosophical reading of The Metamorphosis, this moment represents what all of us at some point instinctively do. We cling to a single bond as proof that we still belong. The sister assumes care, creating a silent illusion of salvation. Gregor begins to wait for her, to expect her. An expectation, though human, carries a profound risk. Existential philosophy warns that when we place our dignity in another's hands, we become vulnerable to their withdrawal. Kafka doesn't romanticize this bond. He constructs it to dismantle it with painful precision. At first there is empathy, then obligation, then fatigue. The transition is subtle, almost imperceptible. In Kafka Explained, this shift shows how even care can become a burden when it doesn't arise from awareness but from compulsion. The sister does not abandon Gregor out of cruelty. She abandons him out of emotional exhaustion. And that makes the rupture even more devastating. Whenever I reflect on this, I think of how many relationships start with good intention but end in resentment. Caring for another requires presence but also limits. Without limits, care becomes a burden. Existential psychology points out that no one can sustain a relationship based solely on duty indefinitely. Affection needs continuous choice to survive. The betrayal here is not explicit. There are no shouts, no direct violence. There is a decision, a silent choice to give up. In The Meaning of the Metamorphosis, this moment marks the final collapse of Gregor's belonging. When even the one who cared for him begins to see him as a problem, hope turns into deep pain. If I translate this to practical life, the lesson is clear though difficult. Care cannot be sustained at the cost of personal erasure. Neither side. In healthy relationships, there is exchange, not unilateral sacrifice. Practices like clear communication, explicit agreements, and mutual recognition prevent care from becoming resentment. Readings like Henry Cloud's Boundaries help understand this dynamic. There is something even subtler here. Gregor notices the change but does not react. He accepts. Loneliness and isolation have already become part of his identity. This is a central point of human dehumanization, when someone begins to believe they deserve to be left behind. Existential literature shows that the deepest betrayal is not by another, but when we internalize abandonment. In modern alienation, we expect someone to validate us, save us, recognize us. Kafka dismantles this hope with brutal honesty. The sister is not a villain. She is human. And precisely for that she fails. This failure exposes a hard truth. No external bond can sustain the value of a life alone. From personal experience, I've seen how excessive expectation can destroy promising relationships. We expect the other to fill voids that aren't theirs. When that doesn't happen, we call it betrayal, though often it is simply a limit. Literature and consciousness teach that emotional maturity begins when we remove the obligation to be saved from others. The moment the sister verbalizes her withdrawal seals something irreversible. Gregor understands, even without words, that there is no longer a place for him in that system. The hope that sustained his existence dissolves. And when hope fades, something shifts profoundly in his relationship with life itself. This chapter leaves us in a state of silent emptiness. No hope, no bond, no expectation. What remains is not revolt but fatigue. Fatigue that is not physical but existential. From this point, the narrative moves toward its conclusion, not as an explosive tragedy but as quiet, inevitable resignation. Death as existential relief. When we reach Gregor's final moments in Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, something emerges with a strange quietness. There is no despair, no rebellion. There is exhaustion. A deep, silent fatigue that does not originate in the body but in the soul. In any honest philosophical reading of The Metamorphosis, Gregor's death does not appear as an overt tragedy, but as a kind of belated rest. And this is disturbing precisely because it feels understandable. Gregor does not die struggling to live. He dies because he can no longer sustain existence. Existential philosophy recognizes this state as existential exhaustion, when living stops being a choice and becomes mere resistance. Kafka does not romanticize death, but neither does he dramatize it. He presents it as the natural consequence of a life emptied of meaning, connection, and recognition. Existential psychology makes an important distinction between the desire to die and the desire to no longer endure suffering. Gregor does not wish to disappear. He simply cannot find any reason to continue. This nuance is crucial. In the meaning of the metamorphosis, death appears when all layers of identity have been stripped away. Worker, son, brother, human. What remains no longer has a place in the world. Whenever I reflect on this passage, I think of how many people continue living biologically but are emotionally exhausted. People who do not contemplate death but pause. Silence. Not having to sustain expectations anymore. This is where burnout and literature intersect brutally. Kafka anticipates a state that today borders on epidemic, the fatigue of existing. The family reacts to Gregor's death with relief. This detail is one of the harshest in the entire work. There is no deep mourning. There is reorganization, plans, a future. In Kafka Explained, this moment shows just how much Gregor's presence had become a burden. And when death brings relief to others, it speaks volumes about the level of human dehumanization reached even before the end. If I bring this to practical reflection, it requires care and sensitivity. The lesson here is not to accept exhaustion as destiny, but to recognize it before it becomes irreversible. Listening to the signs of profound fatigue is not weakness, it is awareness. Practices like reducing inhumane paces, seeking real emotional support, and rebuilding meaning are ways to interrupt this path. Readings like Brené Brown's The Courage to be Imperfect help reclaim humanity where only demands existed. There is also a spiritual dimension in this moment. When life is lived only as obligation, death can be perceived as liberation. Existential literature does not celebrate this, it warns. In Kafka's The Metamorphosis, Gregor's death functions as a mirror for the reader. How far can life be emptied before collapse? From personal experience and stories I've heard over the years, I've noticed that the greatest risk is not intense suffering but numbness. When pain becomes so constant that it is no longer felt, something essential has already been lost. Modern alienation produces exactly this. People who no longer cry, dream, or hope. What makes this chapter even more unsettling is its serenity. There is no chaos, no explicit guilt. Life continues, for others. And it is at this point that the hardest question begins to form. Who truly needed to change? Gregor, or the world around him? This moment of absolute silence sets the stage for the final reflection of the work. Because if death brought relief, perhaps the true tragedy was not Gregor's end, but the fact that no moral metamorphosis occurred among those who survived. From this bitter lucidity, the story moves toward its deepest layer of meaning. The metamorphosis that never happened. When I reach the end of Kafka's The Metamorphosis, the lingering sensation is not Gregor's death, but what happens afterward. Or rather, what does not happen. The family continues. They plan. They breathe a sigh of relief. In any consistent philosophical reading of The Metamorphosis, this is the most disturbing point in the work. The metamorphosis never occurred where it really mattered. There was no moral transformation, no deep questioning. Only continuity. Gregor changes, suffers, falls apart. The family does not. And it is precisely here that Kafka shifts the center of critique. The tragedy is not individual. It is structural. Modern alienation does not end with the elimination of the different. It reasserts itself. Life goes on as if the problem had been solved. This logic permeates entire societies and reveals the heart of human dehumanization. In existential philosophy, there is a clear distinction between change and adaptation. The family adapts to Gregor's absence but does not change. They do not reassess values. They do not question priorities. In Kafka Explained, this detail shows that the true human failure is not to fall, but to continue living unconsciously after another's fall. The absence of reflection seals moral defeat. Whenever I reflect on this passage, I think about how often society removes the symptom without addressing the cause. People get sick, collapse, disappear, and the system remains intact. This pattern appears strongly in Burnout and literature, where the individual is discarded and replaced, yet the model is never questioned. Kafka anticipates this mechanism with chilling clarity. The family feels relief because the inconvenience is gone. And this reveals something brutal. Gregor was not seen as a person but as a problem. When the problem disappears, so does the weight. In the meaning of the Metamorphosis, this passage dismantles any superficial reading of the work. It is not about pity for Gregor. It is about accusation toward the environment. If I translate this to everyday life, the reflection is direct and uncomfortable. Who have you become after the failures of others? Do crises around you awaken empathy and internal reflection, or merely reinforce the desire to move forward without looking back? Literature and consciousness invite us to observe not only suffering but our reaction to it. Existential psychology teaches that the absence of conscious mourning prevents transformation. When we do not process loss, we repeat patterns. Gregor's family does not process. They reorganize. And reorganizing without reflection is merely repeating more efficiently. This is one of existentialism's deepest critiques in literature. In real life, we see this constantly. Toxic environments persist because survivors normalize the violence. Companies, families, social groups continue functioning as if nothing happened. The metamorphosis that never occurs is this: the collective inability to learn from another's suffering. Kafka ends the work without redemption to provoke the reader. He shifts responsibility. The final question is not about Gregor. It is about us. In Kafka's The Metamorphosis, the absence of external transformation is an invitation to internal transformation. If nothing changes in the story's world, something must change in the one reading it. This chapter leaves a bitter but necessary taste. It forces us to recognize that consciousness is not automatic. It requires intention. It requires courage. And often, it requires breaking free from the comfortable normalcy that protects us from ethical responsibility. It is from this lucidity that the work concludes. And it is also from here that the video must go beyond analysis. Because understanding Kafka is not the end. The real challenge begins when we ask ourselves, what kind of metamorphosis must occur in me to avoid repeating the same cycle? The possible metamorphosis. When someone chooses to wake up. I want to close this journey with a simple yet deeply human story. It is not the story of Gregor Samsa. It is the story of someone ordinary. It could be me. It could be you. Let's call him Daniel. Daniel woke up every day at the same time, took the same commute, followed the same route. He worked well, was responsible, reliable. Never missed a day. Never complained. In everyone's eyes, he was exemplary. But inside, something was slowly fading. It wasn't explicit sadness. It was emptiness. Fatigue that didn't disappear over the weekend. An internal silence that was hard to explain. A sort of invisible insect growing inside the soul. Daniel also carried expectations. From his family, his work, himself. He said yes when he wanted to say no. He swallowed discomfort in the name of stability. Just like in Kafka's The Metamorphosis, no one forced him directly. He forced himself. Modern alienation did not shout. It whispered, keep going. This is just how it is. One day nothing extraordinary happened. No tragedy. No job loss. No loss at all. Daniel just paused in front of the mirror a few seconds longer than usual. And there arose a question he had never allowed himself to ask. When did I stop being myself and start just functioning? This was the awakening no one wants to have. But when it arrives, everything changes. Unlike Gregor, Daniel did something rare. He did not ignore the question. He did not try to drown it out with more work, more distractions, more noise. He started small. He reduced unnecessary commitments, set simple boundaries, began writing at night, not to produce but to listen to himself. Read books about meaning, not performance. Viktor Frankl, Byung-Chul Han, Marcus Aurelius. He began rebuilding his internal language. There was external resistance. Not everyone liked it. Some relationships cooled. Certain expectations crumbled. But unlike Gregor, Daniel did not mistake this for failure. He understood that not all losses are negative. Some losses are filters. Existential psychology calls this maturation. When you accept the cost of awareness in order not to pay the cost of erasure. Gradually something changed. Not the world but him. Work stopped being identity. Guilt gave way to conscious responsibility. Isolation ceased to be a prison and became a space for listening. Daniel did not become someone else. He returned to being someone. This was the true metamorphosis. And here is where the philosophical reading of the Metamorphosis finds its most important point. Kafka did not write this work to condemn us. He wrote it to warn us. Gregor did not fail because he became an insect. He failed because he never had the chance, or the courage, to transform before. The question that remains is not literary. It is personal. In what area of your life are you just functioning? Where have you accepted conditional love as if it were essential love? What signs of exhaustion have you ignored in the name of normalcy? If you stopped today, who would you still be? Inner growth and philosophy do not begin with answers. They begin with honest questions. True metamorphosis is not about changing everything at once, but about stopping the slow betrayal of yourself. It is leaving autopilot, choosing consciousness over anesthesia, remembering that you were not born just to be useful, you were born to be whole. If this reflection resonates with you, don't let it pass as just another video. Return to this content. Reflect. Write. Observe your daily life with more presence. And above all, choose not to wait for your body or life to scream what your soul has already been whispering. If you want to continue exploring deep reflections like this, rooted in existential literature, philosophy, psychology, and profound personal development, subscribe to the Philosophy of Awareness and the Soul and turn on notifications. Here the goal is not to rush you, it's to help you wake up. Because the most important metamorphosis is the one that can still happen within you.